In the wake of the 7,000 Bitcoin hack over on Binance, the CEO of Binance has, for some crazy reason, brought up the idea of just rolling back the Bitcoin blockchain to rescue the stolen funds. Not cool, man. Not cool. Now, I'm going to be breaking down this story for you because there has been a lot of misinformation around this story floating around, so we're going to try and actually get down to the core of it. But a quick note before we do, Bitcoin is over $6,000. Woo! I even got the Bitcoin wrap back up, guys. It's very exciting times indeed. Now, by the way, before we do start, Abra, which is a non-custodial wallet service where you are in charge of your own private keys. They allow you, of course, to buy and sell cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin being one of the primary ones, along with Litecoin and a couple of others. But they have opened up support for a whole raft of different cryptocurrencies, including crowd favorites like Digibyte, Dogecoin, hashtag Dogecoin the standard, Tron, Lisk, Neo, and so much more. And a reminder that you can get $25 in free Bitcoin when you sign up using the link down below, after, of course, making your first deposit using a US bank account or an eligible Amex. Let's get into this story because it's a super interesting one. Now, for some crazy reason, CZ thought that it would be a good idea to suggest rolling back the Bitcoin blockchain in order to retrieve those 7,000 Bitcoins, which the hacker made off with, which would basically mean that had a majority of miners actually agreed to this plan, which they have not, but had they, the Bitcoin blockchain could be rolled back, erasing all transactions between now and the time of the hack, and returning the Bitcoin back to Binance, or perhaps even more specifically, just those specific transactions, which would actually shake the crypto economy to the core if this were to happen. CZ, man, come on. Don't you know the rules? This is the game of coins, son. You either win or you die. Seriously, though, if you cannot keep your exchange secure, then it is the cost that you pay. It's a tough cost, a high cost, but a cost nevertheless. And a reorganization would be really no better than a bailout for a bank, potentially even worse, because it would actually erode all of that confidence that the crypto markets have been building over the past few years. Now, I expect this kind of BS from the banks, but not from Bitcoin. Also, a quick note that conspiracy theories right now are running wild online about what happened over at Binance, with everything from this was an inside job to there being some sort of like Tether conspiracy connection thing. And look, if we ever get any kind of evidence that any of that kind of stuff was actually going on, then we can have a conversation about that. But until then, be chilling, guys. Theories are just theories. Also, a theory was being thrown around earlier that this was actually not a hack, but that part of Binance trying to upgrade to SegWit, and that they somehow made an obviously terrible mistake, thus losing those Bitcoin forever. And in this particular theory, those Bitcoin would be unspendable. This is a theory which has also been proven to not be true, as the hacker is currently splitting that 7,000 Bitcoin into smaller bits. These events always attract a lot of misinformation. Be careful of what you believe. Anyway, CZ very quickly retracted his comments, and the idea has, to be honest, relegated to the dustbin of bad ideas. So it's not going to happen, because Binance does not have the power to make this happen. The miners wouldn't support it, and the community is vehemently opposed to this idea. But it did bring up a really interesting point that I think surprised many people, that anything is kind of possible in Bitcoin, but that we must actually try to determine what is actually possible and what is feasible. And yes, it is possible to do a block reorganization in Bitcoin, which I realize, looking at a lot of comments, has come as a surprise to many people who thought that such a thing could never actually happen. It's technically possible. So as a thought experiment, let us explore this idea. But first, some historical context for you. A rollback has happened before. Two, in fact. Shock, gasp, oh no! Really? Yes, actually, back in 2013 when the network was upgraded from version 0.7 to version 0.8, a flaw appeared and they rolled it back to version 0.7, including a few blocks. Also in 2010, an inflation flaw allowed someone to create 92 billion Bitcoin. A rollback was also used to fix this problem. Now, the big difference here with what CZ proposed is that these rollbacks were done to fix a dangerous software flaw, not to bail out a private business that didn't take care of its security adequately. The community was actually behind these previous decisions, and they were actually relatively uncontroversial. I would imagine that if a similar flaw were to happen today, that because basically, as history proves, the majority of self-interested miners in Bitcoin have voluntarily agreed to alter transaction history in order to undo these critical flaws, we'd probably see a similar thing happening again, which but though something to keep in mind is that considering the professionalism and the money that's backing Bitcoin right now, it does actually seem incredibly unlikely that software would be released with critical flaws now or in the future. But if it did happen, then it would likely gain not only community support, but miner support to actually push through those changes to save Bitcoin. So we draw a sharp line in the sand here between a chain reorganization to save Bitcoin from a critical software flaw and a chain reorganization to save a private company from actually what is a small loss in annual profits. We must also, of course, make the distinction between a chain reorganization and a malicious 51% attack. Well, we commonly focus on the evil 51% attack from, some state actor that wants to take Bitcoin down or a banking conglomerate that wants to kill Bitcoin. This is actually much more of a nebulous and unlikely attack vector, even though possible. Greed is a much more probable attack vector. Yes, if the miners were to collude, then yes, it is possible to roll back those blocks, assuming that 51% or more of miners were to agree to such a plan. Yet currently, no one mining pool, not even all of the Bitmain affiliated mining pools together, can command that kind of power. It would actually take enticing a much wider group of miners to get on board with this, most of who would likely disagree. Not even Jihan Wu thought that this was something worth discussing. Also to consider is that if, for example, Antpool were to come out and announce that, yes, we're going to support a rollback so that we can save Binance's money, then regular miners who pool mine with them would jump ship to different pools which do not support that rollback. All of the pools would stand to lose huge amounts of money in this situation, from the home miners or the small operation miners who might be more ideologically driven in their Bitcoin mining, leaving their service and going to a service which supports their ideology. Game theory is basically holding the network together on a daily basis, as miners are supposed to be greedy. They are supposed to be competing for the most Bitcoin, with all pools acting in their own self-interest, the interest of keeping the chain together and mining more Bitcoin. And that such an action, if done to support the profits of a private company or for any other user for that matter, would actually be against their own self-interest, as it would erode the faith that the public puts into Bitcoin and would probably drop the price dramatically, as well as causing a chain split. Miners are collectively making right now around $10 million a day, or $3.65 billion a year. Why would they risk all of that profit to help Binance recover a measly little $40 million? Remember, there are serious mining operations out there, the ones which someone like CZ would need to actually convince to do such a thing. These people have invested millions of dollars into hardware. This is an investment that would face serious risk due to a short-term greed play, which could have devastating long-term consequences for the crypto economy. The reality is that I doubt anyone that could actually affect this situation even considered it for a moment as an actual possibility. Only CZ, really. Why? Well, because this is actually something that is against the economic incentives of the miners, as the price fall resulting in such a ridiculous decision would make their mining computers basically unprofitable overnight, and probably would put many of them out of business, which is not what they want to do. They're in business to make money. And of course, they probably go out of business before they even receive their Bitcoin reward for betraying the network, as the markets would move dramatically quickly. The community, of course, would be devastated, and many people would simply abandon Bitcoin. Big businesses which are just starting to get in would, of course, then question their decision to do this and probably step back, and you see a lot of services stepping back. And funnily enough, even Binance would suffer terribly, as the public backlash for what they would do would be devastating. People would be calling for boycotts against Binance. The loss of revenue would be far more devastating than the $40 million lost. The economic incentives are just not there for a reorganization, especially for such a small amount. All of that devastation, all of that pain, just to try to save a few $1,000,000. And the chain would just split anyway. That's the crazy part. While the Binance hack was relatively small, we must remember that miners didn't do a block reorganization for Bitfinex when they lost 120,000 Bitcoin, nor did they do it for Mt. Gox when Mt. Gox lost 850,000 Bitcoin. And in the case of Bitfinex, there was actually a discussion going on around whether or not they should do this, what the pros and cons were, all that stuff. But keep in mind, the Binance hack is only about 3.5 days of block reward. It's not that much Bitcoin. Whereas Bitfinex, when it happened, was nearly a month of block reward. Surely, in this scenario, it would have been tempting for Bitfinex to offer to pay, for example, half to miners, rewind 2 or 3 days of block rewards and transactions, so that miners essentially get 12 days of block rewards, and Bitfinex maybe gets half their Bitcoin back. But even in a more advantageous situation, they decided against any such scenarios even back then. But what will happen, as a question for you, when the block reward is much lower, or if the Binance hack had been bigger? What if it had been $4 billion in Bitcoin instead of 40 million? Would the conversation be different? I think it might be indeed. Now let's just imagine 20 years from now when the block reward is much lower, and when such a hack like this happens and miners are offered substantially more Bitcoin than they might make, for example, in a year of mining. Will they make the same decision? Will it be so easily thrown away? Now look, it would probably cause a chain split anyway, unless of course 100% of miners agreed even in that 20 year from now situation. But still a question to ask. The question would also then arise, would the community support such a decision? Or would we have a chain split again? And if the chain split, but the majority of miners actually stay mining the rolled back chain, then which would be the real Bitcoin? Because let us make no mistake, a chain split would be super likely in any of these scenarios. But if enough miners actually collude to do this, then they would likely maintain the majority of hash rate and maintain the chain that was rolled back and be able to continue that chain. Unless, of course, the market decides against the rollback chain, that price of that chain collapses and mining becomes unprofitable very, very quickly. And the old chain, the one that did not roll back, is more profitable to mine. Then those same miners who betrayed everyone to make a quick buck will be back mining the old chain. Welcome to free market economics, folks. That's how it works. Now, this could actually be a big incentive for miners. Again, assuming that miners are, just self-interested actors. Even the Bitfinex hack was a good incentive, but as time goes on, that incentive to fix high-profile hacks will grow as the equation of damage to the chain and reputation of Bitcoin versus the amount of Bitcoin that can be gained from rolling things back a couple of days actually grows. Remember, miners are not driven by altruism, but by making money. The question to ask ourselves is this actually bad if it were to happen? I mean, hey, it is a free market, right? Miners are just making money. And the miners, of course, are just actors in that market. What we need to realize is that even if you don't like the thought of what I'm talking about here and the thought of this happening, it is technically possible, however unlikely it might be. And while you and I may think it is a terrible decision, that does not mean that the miners might not someday actually make such a decision. But as the network becomes more and more decentralized, the actual reality of coordination to make such a thing possible becomes increasingly unlikely, which is a good thing. More decentralization equates to more security for the chain. Also, there are a lot of possibilities and innovation that are likely to happen between now and such a future theoretical event, which might actually make such a reorganization even more unlikely and more impossible. But let us also assume that a big enough transaction that warranted a rollback were to take place. What would stop someone else from bribing the miners with more money to not do the rollback? Think about that. What if the attacker themselves were to make the higher bid to the miners? In that situation, assuming self-interest, of course, then would the miners take the higher bid to do nothing? Or should it be expected that the miners will be both self-interested but fiercely loyal to a private business which can't offer them as much money, wanting to change the past? Interesting thoughts, anyway. And we are just talking about an exchange hack here, guys. That's something to keep in mind, which really is nothing. What's $40 million in the whole crypto economy? What if Russia is holding 1 million Bitcoin and wants to send 100,000 Bitcoin to Venezuela? Will certain governments then pay for a reorganization to happen to prevent that from happening? Or what if the big banks start bribing miners? Principles are important. And it's a dangerous road to start going down when you start taking bribes to make things happen. And ultimately, it would be very detrimental to Bitcoin. Thankfully, of course, the game theory of the economic incentives continue to keep the miners self-interested and on the side of the network. And of course, we can also add in here the social defense mechanism of Bitcoin, which is always impressive. We matter, you matter, everyone matters, our voices matter. Basically, everyone that heard this said, WTF are you talking about, CZ? And while it was not what he really was intending to do, he actually ended up sparking a very interesting debate on the idea of a rollback. And look, to be fair, I imagine that some would say some pretty stupid stuff after losing $40 million and then not sleeping for 30 hours and hopping onto a live stream. I wouldn't want to do that. I'm sure he's probably under a lot of stress, but it really brought up a great point, and I think it's so interesting to have these conversations about what's technically possible and what the market will or will not allow in the economics of Bitcoin. Anyway, as always, I would appreciate your opinion on the topic. Hit me up down below in the comment section with any questions or comments about the idea of a rollback and some of the different economic incentives that I have laid out here in this video. I'll be very interested, of course, as always, to hear what you guys have to think. By the way, if you're new around here and you haven't checked out Cryptocurrency Explained yet, it is a supremely awesome course designed for beginners to help you navigate your way through this crazy crypto land. You can find it here in a playlist or at thecryptolark.org. If you enjoyed today's video, leave a thumbs up on it. You can also subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Long live the blockchain, and peace out till next time.